Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, here in the Smog Saal in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also to the audience behind the screens. This is an expert roundtable on better regulation, stronger competition and greater prosperity in the framework of our today's presentation of the Austrian Economic Survey 2026. My name is Elisabeth Kornfeld. I am the Director General for European and Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this expert roundtable. Only a few topics have moved from specialized working groups to the center of politics as clearly as better regulation and the reduction of administrative burdens. Over the past years, we have seen a clear shift at national, European and international level, and what once was seen as a vague objective is now increasingly treated as a primary policy priority. Governments are expected not only to regulate, but to regulate well and to regulate only where necessary. And this development is driven by factual evidence. Across many countries, economic surveys, also the Austrian Economic Survey, and competitiveness reports point at a similar finding. Regulatory barriers, even when well-intended, can limit market entry, hamper innovation, and foremost weaken competition. When this happens, the consequences are felt not only by businesses, but also in the form of higher prices, also by consumers and society as a whole. As a result, regulatory quality is increasingly seen as a key factor for productivity, investment, and economic resilience. We have this debate in particular prominently on the EU agenda. The European Union has recently launched comprehensive simplification efforts, including the so-called omnibus packages. I think we are standing at package number 8 to reduce administrative burdens, improve regulatory coherence and strengthen competitiveness, in particular for small and medium-sized enterprises. Today we also have the European Council in Brussels, and here we also see a very strong strategic focus on simplification. In response, many countries, among them Austria, have improved and intensified their efforts to the framework of regulation. In Austria, this includes the creation of a dedicated institutional structure for deregulation and simplification, like here in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, a special state secretary responsible for this area, and has also already started with several legislative initiatives aimed at accelerating procedures, reducing administrative burdens, and the explicit recognition in the new industrial strategy that efficient and predictable regulation is an essential location factor. These developments reflect the broad understanding that better regulation is not merely an administrative exercise, but a strategic instrument to safeguard economic resilience and long-term prosperity. At the same time, of course, it's necessary that we have regulation. So better regulation doesn't mean no regulation. The central challenge is to strike the right balance, maintaining high standards while avoiding unnecessary complexity, ensuring legal certainty while allowing flexibility, and protecting legitimate public interest without creating avoidable barriers to businesses. To explore this cross-cutting topic further, today's panel brings together different perspectives. However, before we move to the discussion, I would like to invite Christoph Gerner, who sits right next to me, from the Office of the State Secretary for Deregulation in Administrative Simplification, still a little bit of a specific hurdle to express that, to share his perspective and to introduce the topic from the angle of the current reform efforts we take in Austria. So, Christoph, the word is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. And yeah, the State Secretary for Simplification is, his emphasis is to show that regulatory barriers often reduce market supply and by this weaken competition, commercial competition, and therefore ultimately harm Austria as a commercial hub. That is why it's so important for him, to us, to make the legal and administrative framework more liberal, more practical to navigate through. Because if we succeed in lowering those unnecessary barriers, we can encourage more competition across various markets. And in the end, by this improvement in competition, we end up with a stronger supply and more competition as an important contribution to lower and more stable prices. Something that we already know, we already knew from the past 3 years, but nowadays with a renewed importance and emphasis, that this stable level of lower prices, or as low as possibly can be, is a huge factor, not only for Austria as a commercial hub, not only for our economy and the level of economy in Austria, but also as in a political matter, to show that the Austria as a democracy, as a constitutional democracy, is able to face those current challenges and be able to solve them. And in our view, an open, liberal, less barrier-less economy and legal and administrative framework plays a crucial part in all those objectives. And moreover, also something we witnessed and we experienced over the last few years, it is also an important instrument to improve our independence from specific monopolistic providers, whether it's with energy sources or with monopolistic business models. It's important to have this kind of broad foundation for commercial activity. So in order, we not only have a good commercial hub, a good legal framework, but also an independence and a sovereignty aspect. And in Austria, we have a lot of things to do. We have a lot of challenges to tackle, and we are currently on our way to tackle them. And the economic survey is a great example for data-driven help for us to go into the right fields of expertise, in the right fields of law, to help ease those barriers and ease those, or to simplify the legal and administrative framework, whether it's the procedure to permission for new houses, which the economic survey points out that it's a problem in Austria, whether it's the process of founding, of business creation, I'm sure we will hear about that, whether it's the access to professions. We have a very broad and very strict, for our taste too strict, legal framework to limit this access to professions. And yeah, so those are 3 aspects. There are many more as well that all are highlighted in the economic survey, and that helps us to identify the pressure points that we should tackle with priority. And yeah, so that's basically our mission and our goal and the reasons for it.
Thank you, Mr. Gärtner. I think the Secretary General of the OECD today mentioned also some of the points you already pointed out, and the Austrian Economic Survey gives us an excellent opportunity to not only reflect on the challenges identified, but also to discuss what they mean in practice and which reforms could make a real difference in going forward. And therefore, I'm very pleased to have a distinguished panel representing not only economic research, but also comparative international analysis, industry, investment, and of course, we've just heard it, the public policy. Maybe I briefly introduce our speakers today, and let me start by the representative of the OECD, Mr. Dr. Falilou Fall. He is deputy head of the division in the economics department of the OECD and head of the Austria desk. And Dr. Voll has extensive experience in international economic analysis and policy assessment, both at the OECD and previously at the French Ministry for Foreign and European Affairs, where he worked on the economic aspects of globalization. And then let me turn to Monika Köppel-Turiner. We are very happy to have you here again in the Foreign Ministry, Director of ECO Austria. And ECO Austria is one of the leading economic research institutes in Austria. Dr. Köppel-Turiner's research covers public finances, labor market, distributional effects, and political economy. And then we are also joined by Mr. Christoph Schneider. He is a Senior Counselor for Economic Policy at the Federation of Austrian Industries. Dr. Schneider advises on key issues related to competitiveness, industrial policy, and the European economic framework, as well as the attractiveness of Austria as a European business location. And finally, from the perspective of innovation and startup ecosystem, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Markus Lang, General Partner at Speed Invest. The Austrian venture capital fund Speed Invest is one of Europe's most active early-stage venture capital funds, investing in companies across Europe. And Mr. Lang has invested in more than 50 companies, often as the first institutional investor. Thank you all for being here today and discussing with us. May I start with addressing the OECD, Dr. Voll. The OECD Economic Survey often highlights regulatory quality as a key driver of productivity and competition. The topic now seems to be taken very seriously in many countries. Do you observe an actual increase in reform initiatives and maybe already first positive results?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. We are very happy to join this roundtable today at the occasion of the launch of the Economic Survey of Austria. And as you mentioned, this regulatory policy is an important aspect of government policies. It is often, sometimes not taken at the level it should be, but we have at the OECD been working on those, and we developed our product market regulation indicators. They have today more than 20 years, and those have been a driver to show to countries how much where they are fitting in terms of ranking, in terms of the size of their regulatory burden. And we can see that since we've made the first edition to now, most countries have started to acknowledge the burden of these regulatory policies. And it's not to say there is no need of regulation. There are needs for regulatory policies, because regulatory policies tackle some efficiency issues or some redistributive objectives, and good example of good regulatory policies that help to achieve good results are in environmental policies or in safety policies. Those are where those regulations help to achieve good results, reducing emissions and etc. Nonetheless, regulatory policy is a burden, a cost for private firms, and we computed that it costs actually around 0.8 percentage point of growth in the EU, and the Draghi report is a good recall of the cost of regulatory to the competitiveness of the European economy. So since we've introduced this product market regulation indicators, measuring the different dimension of regulatory policy, administrative burden, financial services, and etc. We've seen most OECD countries starting to reduce their regulatory burden to lower their indicators, their ranking and the level of their indicators in this PMR indicator. So it has been a very good driver of changes in regulatory policies. And most OECD countries have started to assess the level of regulatory they have and whether they are always right and where are rooms to reduce them and limit them. And in these PMR indicators, Austria still has a room to go, because Austria is ranking 8th among 38 in terms of highest level of regulatory indicator. So the higher is the worst, the lower is the best. And especially in administrative burden and access to services, Austria still has room to go to reduce its level of regulatory policy. Thank you.
Thank you. We have already seen that reducing the regulatory burden is not only a technical issue, it obviously really affects the very real of growth of prices, of living standard of strong economic indicators. Dr. Köppel-Turina, if you had to identify, and we heard there's still room for improvement in our case, if you had to identify 2 areas where regulatory burdens or regulatory reforms could have the greatest impact, what would you choose?
I would actually take one step back and ask myself always a question whether the regulation is even the correct tool. So I'm an economist, and I can imagine that in policy making there are more lawyers than economists, and lawyers tend to think in terms of laws, and economists tend to think in terms of markets and incentives. So maybe that's just the way we think. But the point being here is that in the case of many regulations, I'm asking us, we have to ask ourselves, is the regulation the correct tool to achieve a certain goal? And sometimes I have the impression that this question has been completely lost, which is start to regulate things, don't think about the goal anymore, and we do not evaluate whether the goal has been actually achieved. Just give you an example, we had the gender wage transparency law in place for several years, which now has been actually one of the things which will become more regulated rather than less regulated at the EU level. And we have studies that show that it had absolutely zero impact on the gender gap, because the reasons for the gender gap are somewhere else. The only thing it produced costs for reporting, which do not make a difference. And that's the goal. So that would be my first thought. And I like to quote Montesquieu at this point, who says that if there is no necessity to write a law, then there is a necessity not to write one, in l'esprit de loi. So that's one point. And going back to the actual regulation areas. When we run regressions, looking at productivity growth or GDP growth or investment quotes, so all those things we associate with competitiveness, and several things point out what kind of regulatory burdens tend to stand out. So one of the things which is probably the most is visible in those kind of regressions is really not the regulation itself, but rather the size of the social, like the taxation and social security laws, which are a regulatory element. It's not only about the fact that they produce direct costs because of taxations, but because they are so complex at the same time that they produce a lot of internal and external costs. So the more complex the law on income taxation and social security, the lower growth and the lower the productivity growth. Another area which tends to stand out is something which has been already mentioned, is permits of diverse kinds, whether it's business starting permit or permit to start building things, which take time and are very costly. So it spans many different areas. And what also tends to stand out is a general quality of the law. So I think that's not an area in itself, but rather the fact, how do we deal with the fact that there are many laws in place which sometimes are they are not aligned, and they give you different directions, and you cannot really fulfill all of them at the same time. So this is where all the policy recommendations come in, such as sunset regulations and trying to get rid of the old laws which are no longer necessary or no longer really modern in a changing world. So I think these would be the three main points I want to make, but I guess we can go into deeper later on.
I'm sure we have to dive deeper on that in the course. Thank you so much. You mentioned the permits, and I think this is exactly the point where regulation, especially when it comes to industry, to business, it meets the reality. And when I go to the perspective of companies and making investments decisions, what are the decisive factors? So, Mr. Schneider, where do you see the currently biggest obstacles, especially from this angle, but also when you go one step further in the framework of, we're talking a lot about competitiveness in Europe, also in a much broader area. Is red tape the big issue when it comes to permits, or is it do we have to differentiate? Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation to come and sit on this illustrious panel and to talk about this really important subject. Thank you for the good question, too. I'll try to answer it quickly. The problem is in Austria, also in Europe. The question is not, so much, what's regulated. You could ask the other way around. What is not regulated? The problem is everything is regulated. And so what's the problem for the enterprises? Don't forget, our wealth is not created by government or not just imported from a foreign country. It is created in this country, in the activities of the entrepreneurial activities at all levels. So what this entrepreneurial activity has less of today than it did when we were more competitive, because we have been more competitive, okay? Austria, taking Austria as an example, was a country where great inventions were made. Inventions that actually gave people Nobel Prizes or made them really famous all over the world. Many of them, in fact, are still being used today. So why were they created back then more than today? Because enterprises had more economic freedom, okay? The most recent index for reporting economic freedom was the one coming out from the Heritage Foundation, where Austria again lost positions, so fell further back. Why do you need this economic freedom as an enterprise? Because as an enterprise, there's two important things. One is, can I make something that people will buy, and how much will they pay for it? And the other thing is, how much does it cost to make this thing? And if the costs to make this thing increase, I'm saying it really so simply that everybody can just understand it. If the costs to make whatever good or service that I offer continually increase, and why are they increasing? What is regulation? Regulation is when the state imposes an activity on economic functions. That means I have to, as an enterprise, do something extra, and mainly it's something which is not paying off for me on the end of the day in the price. And there's so many examples, and I can get to all those examples just a little bit later. But now just for this statement, because I used your question, what do enterprises need? Enterprises need more economic freedom. Every regulation causes new costs, even if it is well meant. So even if somebody, a politician, thinks, I'm doing you a favor, I want to help, but they're creating a new activity, a new policy, a new subsidy, a new something, somebody has to administer it, okay? Then this money has to flow from point A to point B. So you're creating administrative costs, you're creating operative costs, and you're creating financial costs. At the enterprise level, you're creating new internal costs for the enterprise, And if I can't manage those internal costs, I have to hire new people, so I got new personnel costs. And if I can't manage to do it myself, I have to employ a lawyer or a consultant or somebody else out there for external costs. So you see, the most simplest example, which can be well meant, is reducing economic freedom, which imposes a burden on the potential for innovation, and innovation is the only thing that can increase productivity and competitiveness. And so that's why it's essential to not make just well-meaning new rules, but to actually reduce them, and those that you have to make them simpler. Austria, last sentence, is a country of parallel systems. And we can get into that in the discussion maybe, but for every rule we have, we got 10 other ones that do the same thing, you know? And we can talk about that, because that is where you start giving up as an entrepreneur and saying, let's just close the doors and move to Slovakia or somewhere else, Poland.
You dampen my optimism, and I'm normally a very optimistic person. But let me go to the innovative, because you also touched upon innovation and new businesses. Mr. Lang, you have worked with startups, invested in them even before they actually existed or were a legal entity. From that perspective, how much does the regulatory environment influence whether innovation can actually happen and can actually transform into a real business, and especially in Austria or in Europe in general, but especially in Austria?
Thank you. I hope you don't turn to me for more optimism. I am 100% optimist, and I'm a glowing European, but I think it's really like we need to act very, very urgently, and I'm very happy that I can be here, even though I quite visibly lack the PhD of the other panelists. So thanks so much for having me. I think a lot has been said already, and especially what Gustav Schneider said for more established corporates is the same for innovative startups, with one big difference: the costs to start off somewhere else are much lower, right? Because if you have been here for 100 years, and if you employ thousands of people, if you have invested a lot of capex, then you might think twice if you move to someplace else. If you're 30-something and you wanna start a new company, there's less legacy that you have to consider, which makes it even easier to start your company somewhere else. And I have to admit, and this is where my pessimism, or my if I were to frame it more positively, my urge to do stuff comes from, because from a pure venture capitalist perspective, I don't care, right? Then I invest into the US company. So be it. From as a glowing European, I think it hurts, because what you said is very true, that we had many very smart people that invented great things in Austria, but guess what? We still have them. It's just that they sit in London or move to the US or build companies someplace else. I've been doing this for the last 15 years, and never ever did I see, despite Trump, such a percentage of great entrepreneurs that decide to build their companies in San Francisco. And that has partly to do with regulation and the amount of work it not necessarily is to start a company. Yes, I think we should certainly do that, and EU Inc. might lead to somewhere, or maybe not. Since yesterday I'm less positive, but that's very much to be seen. But the big challenge is that it's very hard to scale a company in Europe. On the one hand side, because we have 10 parallel rules for everything in Austria, and then if you want to grow across Europe, you have 27 countries that have each 3 to 10 different rules, and then at one point in time you go bonkers and move to larger single markets where this is less less of an issue. And if you're honest, again, and that's the point I want to make, that we have everything, right? If you want to build an innovative economy, you need talent. We have them. We have like some of the smartest people on the globe, Austrian or European. We have some of the best universities. We have the cash. Let's not forget, we do have the cash. We are, at least today, a very wealthy part of the world. So we could be there tomorrow. There's nothing that blocks us, right? We just need to do what you and many others have started at 10x the speed, right? Because I feel that while I feel it's super positive that you know, less regulation and more focus on like, you know, business growth, and especially now with my bias, with more focus on how can we, like, you know, create an environment for innovative companies in Austria and Europe. That's all great. But if I were to be cynical, I'd say that, you know, the report shows a lot of great findings. Mr. Letta wrote very smart things. Mr. Draghi wrote very smart things. But, you know, the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is when you set out to do stuff. And what I lack at this point in time is the sense of urgency, because whatever you do, and I think in like the state secretary has seen this firsthand, there's like 7 people that tell you why this is absolutely impossible and cannot be done, and you have well-established lobbyists that tell you why something is not possible. But honestly, if you don't find a way to move past those lobbies, nothing will ever change. Because yes, there is a reason why we had notaries in 1896. But is there the same reason in 2026? I personally doubt it. I have 2 friends that are notaries, and I wish them all the economic luck in the world. And I think if I buy a house, I want the notary to take care of. And if like, you know, my last will should also probably be done by a notary. But I can't, like in my line of business, when it comes to corporate law, I cannot hear it anymore. My killer argument is always we have 400 companies, 200 in companies with notaries, 200 roughly in companies without notaries. And guess what? The rule of law also exists in the UK, and contracts are honored also in the US, and it does work, right? And I think I don't blame the notaries. If I, you know, were a notary, I'd also want a strong chamber that protects my interests. Sure, there's nothing bad about it. The main question is, are we willing to move and deregulate even though it hurts? Because there will always be forces that want to keep the status quo for good reasons, right, from their perspective. But I think we need to do more, and we need to do it faster. Otherwise, this trajectory will continue. And I think if it continues, then we have a problem, because coming back to what Mr. Schneider said, where do we expect growth and wealth to come from? And of course, I have a bias, having worked in the tech ecosystem for 15 years, and I think that tech ecosystem can play a big role if we let it. The problem is, last sentence, we always think of startups as what they are today, right? Which is a few thousand people. Some picture them people with hoodies, writing codes, black screen, green font. When in reality, I think that, you know, many of the garage startups today that are not really started in garages, but let's stick to that example, can be leading companies in the future. And again, I know it sounds so stupid and so obvious, but look at the United States, right? 7 of the 10 biggest companies are venture-backed ex-garage startups, full stop. 9 out of $10 that are invested in R&D are ex-startups. The majority of economic growth in the US comes from ex-startups, right? And if you think of that potential, where, by the way, Monica has done a fantastic survey on the potential of what, like, you know, the role of tech could be in Europe, then, you know, it also grows in importance from, because I understand it, right? If I'm a minister and I have like every day 7 people standing on my door, and there's this one group of people, 5,000 voters with an economic impact of X, then I might deprioritize them. I think we need to start looking at what's possible, not what is there today. Otherwise, we'll face serious challenges.
Thank you, and I'm glad I'm doing the moderation, being the only PhD lawyer on this panel. So obviously, my profession's perspectives will change significantly. But now we have an analysis. I think we have a great awareness that we have to do something, and also the public perception, I think this is also important, is going towards this direction. But when we look into practice, and we've seen it at the omnibus regulations, to have the aim to better regulate, simplify is the aim, but the path is extremely difficult. Christoph, where do you see possibilities? Where do we heading? What are the instruments that could be of use?
Yeah, as a jurist myself, it was very eye-opening that we mentioned that regulation is not always the right tool to solve problems. And I, for myself, I tend to also fall into this trap to think about how to regulate, to deregulate. But something that we witnessed in all our in the process of gathering the information from businesses, from citizens, from governmental agencies over this last 12 months was one recurring theme that was surprising to me, but very eye-opening, is that it's also not only about regulation, about standards being higher or lower. That's an important thing, but it's something at least I know how to change, or how we could change it. But a recurring theme was that we need a shift, a change in the mindset. In the mindset of the legislature, but also in the mindset of the administrative offices, so that they see themselves as being enabling businesses rather than just checking on them, to see them as having some kind of ownership in getting a permit done, rather than just checking the boxes that the legislator give them. So this kind of need and urgency and wish for a shift in the mindset of the responsible people, that's something that really took me by a surprise, especially with many people telling us that it's, and there I'm very interested in the comparative perspective, that it works in other countries, it works even worse. So Germany doesn't get the best grades on this part, but in other countries it works much better. For example, Switzerland is always described to us as a place where it's much more productive to cooperate with administrative agencies, because they have this sense of ownership and responsibility and possibility to enable things rather than just to check on it. So I'm very curious if Mr. Fall, if you have some way to, if you have some experience or some perspective on this mindset aspect of things in different countries. And yeah, so that's a huge problem. The other difficult problems, they were also mentioned. Every kind of regulation that we try to tackle, and we think we could make it easier, we could make it simpler, there are always three people telling us why it's important that it stays exactly the same, and it's absolutely the bare minimum. We cannot touch it, we cannot change it. And quite frankly, often they have at least a plausible argument. It's not that I say, I don't get your point or I don't get your perspective. It's just then a matter of prioritization, of balancing, and then it gets tricky. Not impossible, and we do make progress, and we get better at doing engaging in those discussions, but they need to happen, they need to be discussed, and that doesn't make it much, doesn't make the process more quickly, even though we hear and we share the urgent need for quick improvement, for quickly better regulation.
Then let's turn briefly, before I open the floor to everybody else, turn briefly to OECD again. I think we have a good assessment what the problem is. We also saw it in the economic survey. What can you advise us? How can you advise us? What are the recommendations? Who is the lead in that? Where is the secret button that we have to push?
Yes, I thank you. And I think there are many ways to try to reduce the burden of regulations. Yes, there are many ways to try to reduce the burden of regulations, and we found over the years different ways to do things. First, avoid introducing too many new regulations. So we've advised every country to do kind of impact assessment. Whenever you want to introduce new things, impact assessment, to see really what will be the cost and the benefits, whether it's really worth it to do this new regulation. Second, one type of things that work, every time you add one, you remove two. So then you start wondering, okay, if you have a code that is this size and you want to add one, you remove two, at some point maybe you will reduce it, you will halve it. So we have different tricks, kind of silence consent rule. So, okay, if the administration does not respond over 6 months or 3 months, so you are permitted, you are licensed. Those are ways to reduce the burden, the administrative burden. We have things like sunset clauses. We have regulatory sandboxes. There are different ways to try to have good practices in terms of making regulations and reducing administrative burdens. So, for example, setting clear maximum time limits for low-risk authorizations. Those are ways to say, okay, once you filled in, you don't have to go and ask again, when will I receive my response? When will I receive my authorization? No. If 2 months you don't receive an authorization, the default is that you are authorized. And so now the burden is on the administration. If they don't think this should go, to react and to and that you can do for many small or type of licensings or authorizations that are not risky. I mean, there is no like safety risk, there is no huge risk. And I think those are ways to have good practices that will slowly but surely drive you to reduce your regulation and to have good regulation. So the point is not to say we don't need regulation. We just need the right level of regulations and regulations that yield more benefits than cost. I had a number I wanted to share. In 23, the share of employment devoted to regulatory tasks in Europe was 3.9%, almost 4% of employment. So if you take the wage, it's a huge cost. So are all those, and you look the share of employment in R&D, it's 1.7%. So there is something unbalanced there, where we need to correct things to make sure that when we have regulations, they are at the right level and they yield benefits, more benefits than cost. Thank you.
Thank you. May I briefly turn to the economist?
Sure. I wanted to follow up on several points. The first point, I loved your idea about more skin in the games for the executives. I'm thinking stock options for the executives so that they actually have a stake in the company if it fails, and they have incentive to make their life easier and not more difficult. Just a joke. Maybe not. Maybe we should evaluate that one. No, so, on your point, I actually written down the same thing. Obviously, I'm a great fan of evaluating cost and benefits, but the problem is it's probably more complex than that, because at the end of the day, it's a political decisions, because everyone will come up with a different cost-benefit analysis from a different angle. So one will give you an economic cost and benefit analysis, and the other one will give you a social cost and benefit analysis, and the third one will be the environmental. So I think the big two fields in which those conflicts really have been visible in European policy making is one is kind of the conflict between risk-taking innovation and versus like the absolute drive for securing everything, which is like visible. If there is an accident or there's something bad happen, we tend to overshoot with trying to make everything safer and safer. And then there was a lot of shift towards the safety thinking, but that's a political decision. It's not a question of cost benefit. It's a question of what kind of political goal I'm trying to pursue. And I think we need to try to pursue the growth innovation model, because that's something which will in the long run give you more benefit than cost. And the other area which I think was very visible in Europe is the environmental axis, in which we can in which we have this question of like we're building, trying to change our energy system. We need to build wind farms. We need to build electricity lines for our own prosperity. But then the environmental reasons often are against it. And I think this has to be another shift in European thinking, because we will not save the environment either if we're not able to have a prosperous economy. And following on point what Markus made, I think we have those two levels, right? At the national level, we have all the kind of lobbies and interests. Obviously, we're not naive people. At the European level, it's even more visible because we still have a not complete single market, because every country runs their own rules on product market. They want to protect their markets. There is an IMF study which tells us that we have an equivalent of tariffs of 44% for industrial products and 110% in services via non-tariffary trade barriers, such as different regulations. And this is an enormous cost for the economy. So we need to start thinking more European in all aspects, right? And I'm sorry, maybe that's naive, but I think the role of politicians to tell that we are in the same boat and we stop thinking about particular interests. Another point you made, the EU Inc., that's the same case, right? So essentially there was something really good which will help upscale European companies, but particular interests of countries were in the place. Mercosur agreement, same story over and over again. So it is a question of leadership and explaining that we are in this together, and sometimes you just have to drop those particular interests and ignore them and convince the people. I have no idea how to do it. I'm not a politician, but that would be something which would be huge, both on national and economic in European level.
May I turn briefly, because it was mentioned, but let's open the floor. Any questions from your side?
I'm not sure if it's working, but I think you can hear me in any way. So we talked a lot about the solutions to this regulation problem that Europe has, and I just wanted to ask anyone here to specify what the reasons for failure are. We've heard that, for example, the Draghi report has only been implemented to around 10 to 20%, even though the European leaders, they have understood the problem. So what is the reason for this?
Dr. Schneider, any idea?
Could you repeat that?
Why are we failing?
Why does Europe fail? Although the problem has been understood, we have the omnibus, we have not implemented in the scope that it was intended, and as the colleague said, it's about only 10 to 15% of the Draghi report that has been already implemented since its issuing.
Well, I guess there's an easy answer. It's because the incentives are wrong. At the enterprise level, you have a simple incentive: profit. Okay? Because if you do not make profit, you have to be Elon Musk. So you can survive 10 years without profit, and then someday maybe you'll make one. But if you're not Elon Musk, you need profit as soon as possible. So it's a simple incentive. It's very clear. What is the incentive of a politician? What is the incentive of a politician, of a decision maker The incentive of a decision maker is to be popular. Because your KPI is the vote, okay? Your KPI is not the dollar, because it's irrelevant how much tax income comes in. Just our last administration in Austria has shown, in fact, it's better to try to make this more expenditure than income. Austria is a little bit typical. We can use an example for Europe in this case. It's a country where there's a saying, and I will say it in English even though it's an Austrian saying. The business community, whether it's the startup community, the long-established enterprises, the large enterprises, the small ones, it's irrelevant. It's entrepreneurship. We have to rekindle, and that's the difference too in the past. Entrepreneurship had a status and was something that was deemed effective, and people looked up to entrepreneurship. Today, European politicians are not European politicians. European politicians are national politicians that are sent to Brussels because we don't want them in our capital cities. That there may be an exception to that rule, but it is a rule, okay? These people are making rules, and again, Austrian examples. They're making entrepreneurship, and that's the difference to the United States. In the US, if you start a company, if you have a big company, you're a hero. In Britain, in Austria, or in Central European countries, we talk about the hidden champions. Why? Because you don't want to be exposed. Because the minute you are exposed and you make a little bit of successful advances in making a profit, the government thinks, hey, here's a chance to increase our income and we'll raise taxes. Okay? So we're making entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial activity villainous. Okay? It's the bad guys. Just think of what type of laws we have implemented at the European level. The supply chain directive. What was it what we wanted to do on European level? We wanted every enterprise to report on everything in its supply chain all the way down to where they didn't even know it was coming from. Why? Because we didn't trust them, right? Why didn't we trust them? Because our politicians said, don't trust these enterprises, right? And it's irrelevant. It was supply chain initiative or the deforestation initiative. Look at Austria. Same story. We got a law against shrinkflation, okay? Why did we have this law? Because these really bad enterprises are ripping us off. You get what I mean? We're developing an anti-entrepreneurial culture on this continent. That's why the United Kingdom did not want to be part of the European Union anymore. It's a very complicated issue that will take a lot of effort to change. And if you change the incentives for the politicians, and if you have, unfortunately in Austria, we have only one politician whose incentive of all the leading decision makers, whose incentive is to have less regulation or less rules. All the other ones' incentive is, I have to show the public that I'm doing something for them. You see? At the enterprise level, last sentence, what do? You reduce the costs. You don't increase the costs on purpose. That should be the incentive at the policy level. Reduce the costs and don't increase them just for the sake of having them.
Let me pick up on two elements you mentioned, because the United Kingdom very much stuck in my head as well. I remember the red tape discussion we already had 20 years ago. So So I think the United Kingdom knew exactly why they were pushing this. I think it was not the only reason they left, but certainly,
No, it wasn't.
but certainly it was a big issue, and they had a big lobby also in Brussels on that question. But let me go to the lobby of the new companies, of the startups. I think when we see it in the Austrian public, we are all desperate when another successful company goes to the US. Yeah? That's the moment where we realize we had an excellent startup with great ideas, but this is the moment when we realize, and then this company is basically lost for the European market. What would be the trigger? What would be the incentive for these companies to remain here? And how can we better see them? And where's the lobbying? Or does it work in a completely different way?
Well, I think the main reason why we have quite a few successful Austrian companies is because it's a fantastic country. It's a fantastic place to live with like, you know, fantastic mountains and trees and forests and like parks, and like Vienna is a fantastic city. Like, that sounds like a joke, but I mean it. The main reason why people stay is because it's a great country, and the main reason why we get international talent here, despite a 9 months Rot-Weiß-Rot card process with like 4 hiccups on the way, is because people think, yeah, it's, this is where I want to raise my kids, and I think that's a core asset, and we are well advised to protect it, but I think it can't be the only asset. Entrepreneurs, founders, especially in the software and tech side, they want to build stuff, right? And they are hardwired to build stuff, and not necessarily big experts in regulation. And that, I think, is the challenge. It's so hard to simply do stuff and get capital for that, because that's an entire different question, right? A single market. Yeah. We talked about very different pension system. We talked about that. The biggest providers to US tech companies, like ultimately, are endowments. Is the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, is the Yale Endowment. We don't have those, like, you know, capital providers. We need them. I think otherwise, you know, we will never be able to create this flywheel. But I think, look, you can think of Peter Steinberger, whatever you want. He's certainly a character. But I think this example tells you everything you need to know. The guy invented something. He like sold his company, then he basically locked himself up for 9 months and built something. That's arguably cool. Nobody knows if it's going to be like the next standard, but like, you know, from NVIDIA to the Chinese government, everybody's deploying CloudBot, so can't be an entirely bad idea. The guy flew to the Silicon Valley, and within 14 days, met everybody and their mom. Politicians that told him why he needs to build it here. He met Sam Altman ad personam, he met Mark Zuckerberg ad personam, he met Jason Huang ad personam. They basically, like, after 2 weeks, he had 6 offers from some of the biggest companies in the world to build it as an open source product under the umbrella, because they thought it's going to help the AI economy in the US. As a parting gift, he appeared at ZIP 2. There was not a single question around why it's cool what he built and what are the most important use cases and what could happen, but there were 7 questions around, okay, isn't that dangerous? What could go wrong? Data privacy, yada, yada, yada. And I'm not saying that as a journalist you should not be critical, right? But maybe let's ask 5 or 6 questions on the potential of this and 1 or 2 on regulation and downsides and risks. But let's not start the conversation with 8 questions on why this is dangerous, will kill jobs, can't be data compliant, and then in the end be surprised why the guy took the first plane to the US and built there. And I think that is, it's one example, and I don't want to put too much into it, but I think it's a good example because it was so visible. And then the guy was gone for 3 weeks. I got a call from an Austrian politician asking if they couldn't meet Steinberger in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, maybe, but like, you know.
No, we get the point, and as I said, obviously the mindset is still not there, but the awareness is raising. But Dr. Voll, you mentioned as one of the methods to reduce red tape, to reduce regulation, is if you have a new one, reduce, abandon too. Christoph, how easy is this being done? What are the hurdles?
It's difficult. It's difficult, and yeah, I mean, it sounds great. It would be great, but it's really difficult to do because I think it's probably more difficult to get rid of a law than to make a new one better. Because if you are starting on a system that is in place, that is established, that people grew accustomed to, that organizations set up their organizational setup on, it's difficult to fine-tune it because there are so many stakeholders involved, there are so many perspectives, there are so many lobbyists arguing on their part, that it's, in my experience, very difficult to really fundamentally, radically improve upon an existing law. So that's difficult. I think the sunset clauses are a great thing because it provides a pressure point that we have to revisit a law, that we have to revisit a certain system, and otherwise it's gone. So then we would need to start from scratch, which in my experience would be the easier way to do it. But yeah, that's obviously nothing that we are very accustomed to in Austrian legislation. Sunset clauses are not very, haven't proven a very successful pathway in Austrian law. I think the only, I'm not sure if that's right, but it's a very good saying, and it at least proves the point. The only successful example for a sunset clause was the law on sunset clause, which isn't in fact enacted anymore. So I think it's more easy to try to reduce the regulatory burden in new laws than really substantially improve on those that are already existing.
Would it help, Dr. Turina, to have a more open discussion on the real costs if measures are introduced and concrete evaluation, what it actually means for the general public, for the taxpayer, for the consumers?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I'm a great fan of the idea. In several projects, we brought this also up so that we need an actual evaluation of the cost. We don't have this kind of data in Austria. We have some in Germany, for instance, since many years, but that's just part of the story because in several areas of the lawmaking, we do have those in place since many years. So since the reform of the budget making in 2013, we have basically evaluations of a new law, which has to give you like a general idea about the cost of the effects of the law. But this problem is nobody takes it seriously because it's there, but nobody thinks about it. It's just like, I have to do it, and I have to provide it with the law. And let's calculate a little bit. So that would be another mindset topic. But I think I want to come up on the point of incentives. I fully agree with Christoph that the problem is obviously that the politicians have different incentives than companies. So maybe stock options for legislators too, but that's another joke. No, but I think about aligning the incentives because we're not going to change those incentives. Politicians need to be re-elected, and this is not going to change anytime soon, I hope. So the way to go would be also to have more education on the actual economic cost in the population, because what politicians do get elected for good economic performance. That's very well established in the economic literature. But what they tend to do in bad economic conditions, they try to sell it to you as good economic conditions, right? Everything's going to be fine. It's really about optimism. We need optimism and so on. And then people, I guess, buy it somehow. So we have better education of consequences of certain things for the economy among the people, which has to start in school. it will make it more. It will give more accountability that the politicians really start to have to think about good economic outcomes in the longer term and not just to try to sell them. So I think that would be one way to try to a little bit to align the political and economic incentives without introducing. I mean, try to introduce market mechanisms there as well, but that's probably not something very democratic.
But this would be one level, and then we have the parallel levels. But maybe later on that, I see another question popping up.
Thank you. Maybe Mr. Schneider, when we listen to today's discussion, one could get the impression that it's not better regulation that is needed, but really less or no regulation. Often stated argument for regulation, for example, the European Union is that we need it, for example, for the green transformation, which then again leads to economic resilience. Is that a fundamental misconception? Is regulation the right tool to achieve that? Or is it rather subsidies, or is it always competition that leads to innovation, and this will happen by itself?
Essentially, history has shown, and studies show that in truth it is competition and the market that leads to the best innovative results that are possible. Definitely, and we've heard it from almost everyone on this panel, no regulation is not the option, okay? We need reliable framework conditions. And reliable means not just that I can trust in those conditions, but also over a longer period of time. Don't keep changing the rules of the game while we're playing the game, okay? And what also we don't need is we don't need a game where you got 22 players playing against each other, but we got more referees than we got players, right? So it's the right amount which is important. And I think, what Christoph said before, the other Christoph, he said something very important. Let's face it, we wouldn't be sitting here if it was easy, right? And basically, the population, they want to be taken care of in a certain way. That's why it's also called, the government is also called public administration, right? Don't forget. So essentially, it is difficult to change things that we have. It is not impossible. And the omnibus, bus says, funny word, because who wants to ride in an omnibus? I mean, it's not very modern. But anyway, have shown that what Mrs. von der Leyen in her first period as Commission President basically said, this is cemented and this is, on the rails, there's no change in it. Now we're changing it. Even if we're changing some things only a little bit, or we're moving dates for a while, but we're actually showing that it is possible to, even at the European level, change political decisions. That's very interesting, because that's rarely the case. We don't see Mr. Putin or Mr. Trump changing their decisions, no matter how stupid they are. So Europe is actually proving a good point here. They're not going far enough. But one thing that administration, I think, could do, but you all would have to be in agreement in the administration, is to go ahead by example. Be a best practice, okay? We do not definitely, neither in Austria nor in Europe, have the most efficient bureaucracy. We do not have the most efficient and cost-effective public administration, right? Why not start with yourself? I'm doing the other things is 100% necessary, but do that in parallel, okay? But start and show in your own backyard. Back 40 is where I come, Canadians, I come back, we have ranches, right? So we got the back 40. Show in your own backyard that you can actually make changes. And if it works for you, you're going to see that it's going to be accepted in the population, in the public eye, and they're going to start changing that cultural orientation that has definitely gone off in a wrong direction, where we have, and you can only change it by being a good example yourself and doing the other work in parallel.
Please.
If we're talking about best practice examples, maybe for the OECD question, are there any countries in Europe or also elsewhere that would serve as a best practice example for deregulating or simplifying regulation efficiently and effectively?
Thank you. I guess a few points. It's not one country is doing everything, perfectly. I think depending on areas, some countries are better performing and doing things. Some are like, if you take, for example, streamlining the administration, digitalization, easing licensing, etc. You have very good practices in Estonia, for example. Say more advanced than anyone else. But what they can do is not replicable everywhere. Because the political economy is different. They tried somewhere in France, but you have more older people and a size of older people that are more important. And in rural areas and everywhere, they complain and they say we don't want to deal with someone we don't know in the internet. We want a physical person. We want to meet someone. And so and they vote. And they vote more than younger people. And so politicians are very sensitive to that. So they said, okay, we can't go 100% digital because of the administration, because we have this sizable and more aged population that are not ready to jump into this digital world. So there is all this political economy behind this. And so depending on the areas, you have countries that are doing things better than others. I can give you on this, for example, removing 2 when you add 1. France president and the former president put this rule. Because when they vote a law is even in most countries not enough to be implemented. After the law, you need decrees, government decrees. And they say, okay, anytime you present me a decree, I want 2 decrees removing, other decrees. Because if not, we are just adding and adding and adding. And that has been successful in many areas to remove and to look again, okay, if an administration, often they are the initiator, and so they comment, we need new regulation in this, and the president, okay, but look at your stock of regulation and tell me what is not needed anymore, or what we can change. And so anytime they can come with 1, they have to come with 2 others or 3 others to remove. And that's a way of doing things. And one word in EU, in European integration. I think let's not look only the empty part of the bottle, let's also look the full part of the bottle. Europe is, I would say, a business in progress, and the integration is in progress. So there are good progress in some areas. Look with telecoms. Every of us now, we can almost without charge circulate in Europe and have access to internet and digital with no extra charge. So there are good things happening in Europe, but there are things happening too slowly. And there are some areas in its kind of European mindset to be more on the safety side than the risky side. That was in the data and etc. And so there is a need to rework this kind of things to make it function. But let's not just shut the bottle all of it. I think there are good things happening, good progress in some areas, and the goods markets look what it was 20 years ago. Now it's much more integrated and things are so, but there are more to be done on the services sector, and often the blockage is not at the EU, it's at the country levels. Remember, every time the Commission takes a decision, it's countries around who decide. First. So, and there is a level also at the country side, how much are we want to integrate? The ECB is, for example, pushing for the capital market integration, and we need it because Why they go to the US? Because of the status. Because we don't have an integrated capital market. In Austria capital market, although it's a fantastic country, it's too small compared to if you had an EU integrated capital market. So there is work and progress, things that we can improve and that should start at the national level and then at the EU level.
Maybe we have started with the last round. Let me go through all the panelists one more time to give a short final message. Dr. Köppel-Turina.
I wanted to follow up on the question. So we looked in different projects at what countries did regulate things, and in more general, why and how did they reform things? Because that's a more general question. And what always comes up at the top is Scandinavian countries. And Germany is another case because the pain was so big in the unemployment debate in the mid-2000s that they really had a huge labor market reform. But then Scandinavia reformed many things. They regulated, they changed the pension system, they changed the labor market incentives, and so on and so forth. So if there's one thing I would look to was Denmark and Sweden. And when I think about why I think they were more successful than the other countries, I have this impression that in those countries there is much more consensus about sitting in one boat. And you can see it in the tax system because there is no social security, there's just a general tax system, and the people they think as a community. And I think that makes it easier to have those particular interests shut off. So every time there was a big reform in those countries, it was consensual from left to the right, and they were sitting together and saying, so we have this problem we have to solve together. So I think that would be something we need to learn from. And I have no idea how to change this culture in Austria, but that would be probably my main message. It's just so we sit in the boat together and we really need to find a solution now. Otherwise, the only other option is the pain gets so big that it will lead to all the kind of political effects we don't want. If the economic crisis is so huge, there will be a reform eventually. I mean, it will be, but I don't want to see the in-between part, honestly.
Great recommendation. May I continue, Dr. Schneider? What would be your recommendation? Because it's also for us, for our administration, to take on this task of deregulation and better regulation. Please.
I think it can be very simple, and I love practical examples, as you may have noticed. Sometimes I exaggerate a tiny bit, but it's just to make the point, okay? Don't take me wrong. We can learn something from Alcoholics Anonymous and from Weight Watchers. What's the first thing that, okay, nobody's been there, okay. I can tell you. You can guess which one I was at. No. The first thing that you do in these programs is they bring you down and they get you to realize that you have a problem, right? So you have to admit yourself that you have a problem. Monica said something important before. The worse the situation gets, especially in Europe, but Mr. Trump is doing exactly the same. Hey, we're doing great. It's the golden era. Everything's going to be fine. So the first thing you have to do, like I said, is actually get people to admit that they have a problem, what that problem is. And in Austria, we are champions of gold plating and not duplicating, but multiplicating. Okay? When a new regulation law is implemented, just look at the last one they did in hoping to reduce the price increases for gasoline. I mean, we're not going to ask how many people, use gasoline and how many people eat chocolate. They haven't done anything about helping us reduce the chocolate price, and Easter is coming up. But anyway, when you implement the regulation, you cause a lot of costs, but in Austria it's even worse, because then you make an additional move, a directive, or as you said, where somebody else has to take responsibility for monitoring and controlling that activity that you have then done as a law. In Austria, there's so many examples where enterprises have to employ persons with a special profile to then control activities that are created because a new law was implemented. Okay? We call them Beauftragten. I don't know if you've already been, like commissioners. So I'm coming back to my point that I made during the discussion. Enterprises is where the value in an economy is created. That's where the jobs are created. That's where things really happen that make us well off. And these enterprises need a planning horizon, and they need an environment, and Adam Smith already said that. Remember, his Wealth of Nations was published 250 years ago. He said we need trust. And with those two things, a good planning horizon and creating this trust, by not duplicating, by not gold plating, and maybe by being a good example and reducing a little bit, we're going to reduce the amount of referees that we have on the field and let the people play more of the game.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Mr. Lang.
I have absolutely nothing to add to what Monica and Christoph have said. I just want to end on a positive note because there's many parts of the world. So there's like, in getting stuff done, there's stuff that takes time and there's stuff that could be done fairly quickly if we were in agreement about it, right? And I think the one thing we underestimate is that the stuff that takes a long time to build, that the credentials that you can't, the ingredients that you can't easily get tomorrow, we do have them. Again, we have fantastic universities, we have very skilled people, we have great established companies, and we do have the cash, right? That you must not forget, compared to many other parts of the world, where there simply is not the capital. So we have all the ingredients to move very, very quickly. It's a fantastic country with fantastic people, a lot of wealth. So I think if we were to hear the bang, and if we were, and that's the big if, right, that we discussed now for an hour, but if we were to hear it, we could be on a very interesting track very, very quickly. Because, again, we bring a lot, if not all, of the ingredients that you need to the table. We just need to make sure that they're properly mixed and used so that at the end the outcome is what we want. And I think for that, it needs all of us, right? As we sit here and as we sit here in the room, because I think we must not forget that the willingness to deregulate often ends if they want to build a wind park in our hometown, right? And I think this is then where we need to walk the talk and not only complain, but really be part of that movement or be part of the change. Because I think as we all share, politicians want to be re-elected, and per se, I think there's nothing bad about this. This is how democracies work, just to be clear, right? And I think if there's a much stronger demand for deregulation and for competitiveness, then those people will be elected, those people will be empowered, those people will move ahead, and then we'll see progress very, very quickly.
Okay, common effort, trust, speed. Dr. Fall, what is your assessment?
Thank you. I think we've made a big first ride on it, and this is a good starting point. We have some examples and recommendations in the survey, and there are more work at the OECD on those reforms and the political economy of reforms. We've been working on so helping governments to go through this political dimension of making things happen. And so there are things there that can be borrowed to advance this agenda, and we think this is an important agenda to bring back productivity growth, and also business dynamics, to ease entry of firms, exit also of firms, and better allocation of capital.
So support the best practice. Last word to Christoph Gerner.
Thank you.
Everything clear, no?
Everything.
You know what you have to do.
You always have to tell the boss.
No, I hear the urgent need. I hear the call. I hear the slight skepticism on quick and effective answers. But to me, I'm more hopeful, because at first we talked about the incentives of politicians, of the public administration, and the business side being not aligned, not having the same incentive. And I'm not quite sure it is true for this moment, because I feel like the public, the citizens, the businesses, the politicians, everyone basically expects progress. They expect change. They expect improvement. We might think about it a little bit different. What means improvement? How do we can track it? How do we can achieve it? What does it mean? But I think everyone wants reform. Everyone wants to make life easier, because it has been so difficult in the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years. The crisis on crisis on crisis, and the crisis don't stop. So I feel like maybe we are more aligned than we actually thought. And I think the only way this, on the European level, the current administrations, on the Austrian level, at the current administration, we all need to show that we can solve problems. And the problem at the moment is competitiveness. And if we don't solve that, it's a downfall not only for the businesses, but for the current political class as well. So I feel like we are in the same boat. I think most understand it. We just have to make sure that not only our incentives are aligned, but also our vision. And that's a tall ask, but we are not stopping to work on it, and I hope we will deliver.
So on this very positive and forward-looking note, I think this is extremely necessary. Thank you for the very good discussion. Thank you also for turning it from a very theoretical to a very also emotional topic. And I think we have all hands full to continue our work. Thank you a lot. Thanks.